All right. I'm pleased to be joined today by Dr. Robert King. He's a researcher in the School of Applied Psychology at University College Cork in Ireland, and the author of Naturally Selective, Evolution, Orgasm, and Female Choice, which we'll be talking about today. Robert, welcome to the Nature Nurture podcast.
Thanks very much for inviting me.
How did you become an expert in the psychology and evolution of orgasm?
Right. So I don't know how much of my personal history you want, but since you asked for it, I was a school teacher. I worked in a religious school where the teaching of evolution was forbidden, and the kids there said, "Why do you believe in evolution?" And it was a challenge. It was interesting. I taught maths and psychology, and evolution wasn't particularly interesting to me, but they challenged me, so I went away and read up about it, and I got the experience a lot of people have when they start investigating this, which is this is a fascinating field applied to human beings. Why do we not know more about it? Why, it felt like secrets have been hidden from me. And I picked up a book called Alas, Poor Darwin, and it had authors in it who I had some admiration for, like Steve Gould and Mary Midgley and a few others. And it was arguments against evolutionary psychology, and it was filled with the most appalling illogical gibberish I'd ever come across in my life. It was embarrassing for me to read the works of people who I admired talking about the application of evolution to human beings and making such a hash of it. And I could tell this is a non-expert. This wasn't because I was an expert. It's because I could see that they were using non sequiturs, emotional appeals, and all kinds of stuff. So that immediately got me intrigued. And I started reading up about the field. I got interested in the field. I picked up a book by Elizabeth Lloyd. This is about 20 years ago now, which was all about how there was this big scandal that people thought orgasm did something, but in fact it didn't and couldn't. And she had some arguments for it. And I just got really interested, and I started teaching myself about what the background was. And I developed an idea. And the idea I developed was that a lot of the things that this woman seemed to be quoting seemed to have very little to do with sex at all. And that perhaps if we did sort of more field work with people who'd actually had sex with other human beings, then there might be something there worth investigating. And after a few years, I approached somebody who's quite big in the field called Jay Belsky with my idea. And if you listen to him talk about me with the book launch, he said, my first thought was, is this guy a serious scholar or is he some kind of weirdo? Which was a reasonable thing for people to think. So he sent me away to read up some stuff, and I came back in the year and he went, okay, so I think you are actually serious and you might have an idea. And that was the start of my PhD. So that's, what is it? And that's now 14 years ago. There you go. That's
what was the idea?
Well, the idea was that, firstly, that orgasm was being treated as a single thing when, if you talk to women, they frequently report a much wider range of experiences than men do. Men report sort of one kind of thing. And so my first thought was that it's a moving target. One of the reasons it's been difficult to pin down it's a moving target. And the second thing I came across was that one of the major theories in the field, and it's the one that Elizabeth Lloyd, the book I read, espoused, was that a female orgasm couldn't do anything because essentially there's a thing called an orgasm gap. What men usually orgasm. We were talking about heterosexual intercourse here. We could talk about homosexual intercourse. That's interesting too. But just talking about heterosexual intercourse, there's an orgasm gap. Men usually orgasm, although that's not actually true because men frequently don't achieve erections, and nobody thinks that they're badly designed because they don't achieve erections. But parking that for a second, men usually orgasm, women usually don't. What's the explanation for that? There are two potential ones. There's Freud's idea, which is that women are psychologically broken and they need to be more mature. And there's Elizabeth Lloyd's one, which is that they're badly designed by nature and that the clitoris is something like a male nipple. It's a byproduct, and that they're just designed to get aroused by penetrative intercourse but never orgasm. And that explains the orgasm gap. And I came to it with having studied a bit of evolutionary theory with a different idea, which is that women aren't broken and they're not badly designed. What they are is picky. They're choosy. They're choosy in every other field. Why wouldn't this be one? And the more I started looking into it, the more I realized there were a whole bunch of mechanisms and bits of anatomy and physiology that were being sidelined. Plus, nobody was talking to women, and no one was asking them, what's it like? What does orgasm feel like? And then women say, well, that's a dumb question. Which orgasms do you mean? So we go, all right, well, you tell us which orgasms you mean. And we constructed measuring instruments to try and do a typological analysis. And initially, I was really helped out by some colleagues over. I mean, I didn't know that we only approached them online. Mara and Binnick, who are sex researchers over in Canada, and they had collected data on orgasm from a clinic. They're sex researchers and they're therapists and they investigate people's sexual problems. So they shared their data with us, and we analysed it in this new way. That was my first publication, and then off the back of that, we constructed other measuring instruments that were trying to drive more explicitly into women's experiences and what were the predictors of those experiences. So that's the potted history.
The broad evolutionary story that I'm
Yeah.
familiar with is, well, it makes sense that sex or anything that increases survival and reproduction, including like eating or
Mhm.
anything good like that, is gonna evolve to feel pleasurable. And
Mhm.
then it also makes sense that you wouldn't just have, say, a steady stream of pleasure during sex, but that orgasm, at least in men, which would lead
Mhm.
to ejaculation, has to be the most pleasurable part because that's the only thing that could lead to impregnation.
Mhm.
And the mystery of this orgasm gap is, how does it obviously improve fitness or improve reproductive success for
Mhm.
women to experience orgasm? Now, certainly you would want to like it,
Mhm.
because otherwise there wouldn't be the motivation to reproduce.
Yeah.
But it makes more sense to me to have this like pinnacle moment that's paired with ejaculation. What is the female pairing from more this evolutionary perspective?
Well, quite often women don't. The partners coming together, orgasming together, can happen, but it's comparatively unusual. Plus, also that misses out kind of something that really intrigues me. That actually goes back further than my PhD. Do you remember the scene in When Harry Met Sally? That scene, the famous scene, the one where the male character is convinced he can detect when the woman is faking, and Meg Ryan shows that he can't do any such thing, and that's immediately met with laughter and elbowing, and you see what you have to put up with. But a lot of people find it amusing and they find it funny. You think, well, that's kind of interesting, because there are several possible rational reactions. I mean, one is to go, oh, geez, look what we have to put up with, which is fair enough. I mean, that would be sort of rational. But one is kind of, haha, we fooled you. Now that's a puzzling one, because that would be like, if I was playing tennis with you, and then afterwards I say, oh, I thought I had a really good game, and you're laughing with your friends going, ha, Rob thought I enjoyed that game of tennis, but Pat, little does he know, I fake one. Now that's puzzling, and but that's interesting, because it immediately arouses the thought that sex can be highly cooperative, and I'm going to stick my neck out and say I think it's good if it is and should be, but it can also be exploitative, and it can also be cryptic, and it can also have hidden elements, and that sort of alerts us to the possibility of female choice mechanisms, because they are ubiquitous throughout nature. They tend to be cryptic. They're often quite strategic. I mean, can I give you an example? So there's a creature called a soapberry bug, and there's a very famous tactic that soapberry bugs do. The males will mate with the females, and then they will follow the female around. And this was called mate guarding behavior for years. And the other males will come and try and have sex with the female, and the males will fight him off. And for years and years, males, and I don't think they were being particular, they weren't being patriarchally sexist. They were just being thoughtlessly sexist. Male biologists go, this is mate guarding behavior. And then female biologists came along going, yeah, I'm not sure it's quite that straightforward. Have a closer look here. What that little female soapberry bug is doing is she's soliciting fights. And as you look closer, you can sort of see that what she's actually doing is she's attracting other males to come over. The males will fight, and she's sort of observing things. And it turns out when you open up the female soapberry bugs, they have these spermatheca inside them, these structures that allow them to select the sperm. And guess what? They select it from the winning male. So there is something a lot more interesting and complex going on there. The males might think that they're ruling the roost, but actually they're not. They're subject to female choice mechanisms. And that be a key insight for me, is that when men think that they're running things, quite often they're subject to female choice mechanisms. And I think female orgasm is exactly like that. I mean, I think it's doing precisely that. It's selecting, it's increasing the chance of fertilization from particular males. And when you start looking at the patterns of what those males are like and what they're doing, it becomes a lot less mysterious.
I've seen similar evidence from sperm competition in primates, and typically when we think of female choice, we might
Mm,
think, well, it's just mating access altogether. But that
mm,
aside from the regular sexual dimorphism you see, that might be the more male-male competition is, the bigger and stronger they are going to be
mm,
relative to females. But then some have little external sexual dimorphism, but then massive
Mm.
testicles because there's not sexually choosy in that way. Like everyone's having sex with everyone, but there's a lot of
Right.
sperm competition, like in bonobos.
Yes, and chimps, and yeah, the general pattern, as you say, is exactly as you described. So with gorillas, you got the 400-pound male who's competing with his body, and he's got his harem, and he's got his little 2-inch penis because he doesn't need anything else because he's got access, his access to the females is assured. And then you've got the chimpanzees with their huge testicles, massive sperm competition, highly promiscuous females, visible estrus, all those kinds of things. And then so the question then arises, well, where are humans in all of this? And the answer is, interestingly, in between. We're not as sexually dimorphic as the gorillas. We're somewhere around what the chimps are. The male humans tend to be a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. However, our testicles are nothing like the size, which suggests a degree of sperm competition, but probably hasn't been driving that much. But interestingly, what the other thing that we've got is a baculum. We have a bone in our. Unlike the other primates, we don't have a baculum, so our erect penises give an honest signal as to things like health, vitality, and arousal. And we also have the largest penises of any primate. Sorry, I sound like I'm boasting here. I don't mean me personally. Our species has the largest penis of any primate. Not proportionately larger, just larger. They're longer and they're fatter. And there is a suggestion that this is due to the size of the head. People get extremely squeamish about sexual selection when it comes to humans, and they get incredibly ingenious about alternative explanations other than sexual selection. And there's a large and fascinating, and I think it was completely wrong, literature about head size in human babies. Now that correlates with we need to have large penises because the baby size is large. That means the vagina is large. I go into some detail in the book. It's almost completely without merit, but people expend pages and pages over it. And so, I mean, if somebody's interested, I've got a whole set of footnotes about it.
I've never heard of that. I mean, it seems pretty straightforward that that would be a sexually selected feature. And same thing with breast size, right?
Yeah.
Human females have larger breasts than
given that we all know it, feel it, see it, and yeah, you might think that at some point someone will go, given that we all know that we're aroused by these things, want these things, talk about these things, or you might think maybe we're allowed to sort of stick our necks out and go, maybe it's sexually selected. Yeah, no, I mean humans are nothing if not hypocrites. I'm not a Freudian. For reason I've just given, but Freud was absolutely on the money when he said that humans are the only animals that pretend that they're not. I mean, we will go to almost any lengths to try and pretend that the rules don't apply to us. And I mean, that's a fascinating thing in itself. I mean, it's one of the reasons it's one of the reasons I'm here discussing this with you. And it's not Washer, the clever chimpanzee, doing it, because we've constructed huge cultures and art and literature and language, all the rest of it, off the back of our massive pretense. And good, I'm happy that it's not a chimp here discussing it, but we sort of need to reflect on the fact that it's a colossal illusion that we've created. We are animals. We're subject to exactly the same rules. Yeah.
It would make sense to me why we would evolve to find sex pleasurable. Why would we evolve orgasm? Why would we select sexual features like the larger penises and larger breasts? Why would we evolve multiple orgasm types in females, as you showed?
I'm not. I don't have a settled opinion on this. I've got a friend called Tamas who he got really interested in my work because he was saying, oh, it's obviously faking, isn't it? There's obviously one type of orgasm that increases fertility and one kind that doesn't. Now he might be right. We don't have the data. I'm not advancing that as a claim. I think it's possible. I think it's worth investigating. As far as we know, all orgasms increase oxytocin, but some of them seem to increase oxytocin more than others. And I'm not going down the Freudian route of actually. Can I show you why I'm not going down the Freudian route? Just so we're clear. And and also I hope put pay to the byproduct account. The byproduct account is based on the idea that the female orgasm is a byproduct because the clitoris is a small penis, it's underdeveloped and it doesn't do anything. So what I've taken to doing when I give talks about this is I have one of these. I give them out. There's instructions for making them with the book. It is a clitoris. It's life size. I don't know. Are we doing this visually or should I describe it? So it's about 4 inches long. It's shaped like a flower. The visible part is the bit that people think of as the clitoris, which is actually the glands. The rest of it is a multiply innervated organ that is mostly internal, has 14 separate ducts in it, has its own neural pathways, maps onto an area of the brain. I don't know if your listeners will be aware, so excuse me if I'm sort of teaching grandmothers to suck eggs, but your body has the brain has an internal map of the body. Sometimes called the homunculus, the somatosensory cortex, and each bit of the body maps onto something. So it gives you a sense of kinesthetic awareness and all those kind of things. And the bits don't necessarily correspond. It's not like there's a little model of a human in there, because the bit, for example, the bit that corresponds to the foot is right next to the bit that corresponds to the genitals, which might explain why we have foot fetishes. Not sure, but the crucial point is that the clitoris maps onto its own homunculus, which some neurologists say should be called a homunculus, because it's different from the male one. The female somatosensory cortex is different, and it has its own attendant structures. There is nothing like that with the male nipple. Male nipples do not have dedicated brain structures that make them work. And so I put it to my colleagues out there who are still sort of trapped in the 1970s. The byproducts, where it was still, that was still feasible, that the byproduct account was plausible. Bring yourselves up to date. Get an up-to-date anatomy textbook. The byproduct account is a total non-starter, and you are embarrassing yourselves by perpetuating it. There we go. So I've lost what I might have had in that area.
I'm curious about the homunculus idea.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is just a culturally specific thing, but one place that you hear a lot of women have potentially more sensitivity in is the neck, and you even see it with the vampire fantasy.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's no accident that Twilight was this big romance hit. Do you see that reflected in brain structure as well?
Oh, well, I don't want to misrepresent myself as a neuroanatomist. I mean, I cherry pick, the bits of neurology that I need. But yeah, I mean, I would say that women do seem to be more polymorphously perverse than men. They have lots of erogenous areas. I mean, famously, they want more foreplay than men. I'm not actually sure that's always true. It's often represented. Men can certainly go from sort of 0 to 60 faster. There seem to be women who can get aroused quite quickly as well. But just as a general practice, it does seem to be a good idea to take account of whatever your partner finds erogenous. And there are cultures that do. There are cultures that make a lot of play of this, incidentally. It's one of the things that interested me, is that it's actually not clear why some cultures celebrate female sexuality and some don't. There are temple walls. Karnataka is, I think, famous for this, for having walls where there are eye-wateringly detailed examples of how to give sexual pleasure. I mean, to everybody, to all and sundry, and that's actually carved into the living stone of the temple. Whereas we've got other cultures where we mutilate women, in order to stop them having sexual pleasure. And exactly why we go one way or another is not clear. It happens, but we're not entirely sure why. But one variable that certainly happens is that some cultures are aloof and some cultures are intimate. And in aloof cultures, the men and women are much more separate. And in the aloof cultures where the women have more sexual power and more political power and more financial clout, an example I give in my book is the Man Giants, the older women actually train the younger men. They actually go before the young men are let loose on the women, they have to prove that they know their way around. And one of the things they need to show their way around is things like erogenous zones and arousing their partner and making sure their partner has orgasmed multiply before they put their penis anywhere near them, and things of that nature. And I'm not a sex advice columnist, but I think we could study some cultures to our benefit. That would never be a bad idea.
How would you characterize our culture? Because in some ways it's very romantic, and there's now more of certainly casual sex just happening, but we still are uncomfortable speaking of it. I mean, even doing the podcast, which tends to be very academic, we're speaking of sex academically, but I notice often behind my questions just the slight discomfort or the slight going the extra mile to try and frame it in the more academic way than how I would naturally want to say it.
Right. Yes, I mean, sex research renders us literally and metaphorically naked. Yeah. And we are absolutely uncomfortable. I think and this also harks back to your point about the primates. I think one of the things that makes this difficult and interesting and rewarding is that humans have mixed sexual strategies, and we don't just have gorillas have one. Well, actually they don't, because you have the sort of the dominant gorilla and he's got his harem, and then you've got another strategy where the male will try and take the harem off him. They may have sneak mating in gorillas. I don't know of it, so don't quote me on that. But most species have one mating strategy, except when you sort of peel back the vinyl, a lot of them don't, but most primates do, and we certainly have more than one strategy. And I mean, for example, let me give you a joke I was told at the start of this. Somebody said, "Yeah, Rob," it was a friend of mine who was doing stand-up comedy. Rob, what you have to understand is a woman wants three things from a man. The first thing she wants is for a man who is masculine and dominant, makes her feel like a woman. And the second thing she wants is for a man to be kind and reliable and someone that she can depend on. And the third thing she wants is for those first two men to never meet. Okay. Now, whether or not you think it's a good gag, it does illustrate the fact, and similar jokes could be told of men. It illustrates the fact that we have differing mating strategies that, to a first approximation, and this really is only a first approximation, can be broken down into short-term mating and long-term mating. And when it comes to long-term mating, the sexes mostly want the same thing. We want someone who is kind, we want someone who is reliable, we want someone who is smart, we want someone who's got our back, all those kinds of things. When it's short-term mating, it diverges. The men want someone who is sexually willing and has various sort of fertility markers. The women tend to want someone who is dominant and high status and those kinds of things. And the thing is that you might go, well, why don't the short-term maters match up and the long-term maters match up? I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why online dating is just so fraught at the moment. There aren't enough. The kinds of guys that women will lower their standard, not lower their commitment standards for in order to go for short-term mating. There aren't enough of them to go around. So I can't remember who put it this way, but one person, it's not my phrase, so I don't want to claim it, but somebody just said to me that online dating for women, it's like a swamp, and for men, it's like a desert. So, we men aren't very pretty. That idea that you want someone who's 6 foot tall and with a six-pack and a six-figure income. I mean, women will go, yeah, okay, I'll have a guy like that, and then they'll get upset that he doesn't commit to them or the other 1,000 women who are chasing him. Whereas the men go, well, all I want is this sort of nice, decent. Well, no, you don't. You want someone who's going to have sex with you without commitment, and the internet has given you the sense that you can have that, but you can't. You're bringing something else to the party. But the internet doesn't, or online dating really doesn't allow you to advertise that fact. And I think it probably is leading to quite a bit of unhappiness, but for rather different reasons. The women are saying, well, I've got this great guy, he won't commit to me, and the men are going, where are all these women I've been promised? There aren't any of them. And there's probably a small percentage, I don't know what it is, 5 or 10% of guys who are the one. I mean, the thing is, we all know the guys who are good to look at. Most of us are not good to look at. We know the names of the ones who are good to look at because they can earn a living being good to look at. I'm sorry, I'm showing my age, but they're the George Clooney's, the Brad Pitts, the Johnny Depps. Those are them. Yeah, and we know the names of all the good-looking men because there aren't that many of them. That's not what we typically bring to the party. That's what exceptional males who can get away with short-term mating strategies bring to the party. But that's not most of us.
Mm-hmm. So there's the strong evolutionary incentive highlighted in your joke towards cuckoldry, as in if a woman could have the short-term, highest quality dominant sperm, but then also paired with someone to commit and raise the offspring. And then from the male's perspective, that would be your greatest fear. And you have this paternity uncertainty. You hope that it's your child, but you don't have the same absolute proof that the woman does.
Right. Yes. There were people who thought that the rate of extra pair paternity is what it's called in the field. I mean, there were people who thought that it was the highest figure I've heard quoted was 16%, but that's from child support agencies where people have already got good reason to believe that a partner is cheating on them. It's lower than that. I would guess it's somewhere around the sort of 2 to 3% mark, and it would depend on different populations. Sorry, excuse me. But the lowest figure is 1%. But even 1% is enough to drive adaptations. If you had a 1% chance of dying in plane crash, one of the reasons why America is as successful as it is it's managed to take the air travel and made it incredibly successful. And one of the ways it's done that is make it incredibly safe. So you don't even have a 1% chance of dying in a plane crash. You have a way less than 1% chance of dying in a plane crash. And if you've ever been to a country where you have a 1% chance of dying in a plane crash, you don't get on the planes. Okay. I mean, I remember what the Russian air service was like. People only got on those planes if they absolutely had to. You didn't run the country that way. And I think it's similar with this. Even a 1% chance of your genetic payload being completely and utterly derailed like that is enough to drive adaptations. And the adaptations, are not hard to find. They're things like sexual jealousy and all that. Now, there's other ways around that. I mean, there are other species typical ways around it as well. So, for example, one way around it in high risk populations, which includes things like extremely violent tribes in the Orinoco Basin, and also test pilots in America, you get this. Now it's often called wife swapping, but it's more likely partner swapping. Male partner swapping, husband swapping, where the males will sort of get together and agree that if they die, another male will take their wife on. You're immortal because it is a high risk environment. You amortize the risk around the group. So that's one way of dealing with it. Another way of dealing with it, of course, is jealousy. We think that David Buss and David Schmidt did an awful lot of work on sexual strategies theory, and a lot of their initial work was suggesting that there was sperm competition, and then they sort of rejected that because it seems unlikely that enough women are that promiscuous that there's sperm competition actually within the reproductive tract. And I would agree. I don't think there's a lot of that. However, there's quite a lot of people who don't just sort of go out and sperm harvest at a time of peak fertility, although I do think that happens. I think it drives adaptations. I think there's quite a lot of what's now being come to be called monkey branching, where somebody will your partner might not actually be actively seeing someone else behind your back, but if you disappear, she knows who she's going to try out. And one of the things we think that female orgasm might be doing is operating a bit of a try before you buy kind of thing. So, well, what's this guy? It acts literally as a test bed. What's this guy like? Is he considerate? Does he have a dominant streak? Is he going to stick around? Is he the kind of guy that takes his time over things? And all of these things contribute towards the experience. And we suspect that one of the things we want to look at next is that it's driving that kind of monkey branching behavior where somebody goes from one partner to the next. We're sort of the noted sex advice columnist Dan Savage says that we're monogamish, which I think is quite a good way of putting it. I mean, we are monogamous. However, we wouldn't have developed social technologies like marriage, and all the rest of it. If we were just like swans and we pair bond and that's it, yeah. And then once the oxytocin hits, we never look at another swan. We wouldn't have to have these social technologies, but we do. I'm not saying honesty and fidelity are impossible. They clearly are possible. It's just that quite often they need a bit of a nudge, and we know that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have created marriage.
The monkey branching, it's kind of a cynical theory of friend zoning. I've heard it also framed as orbiting. Yeah. And this could be a bias of who's talking about it.
Right.
If it's like incels on Reddit, but the framing is often that it's more common among females to have, say, these male orbiters, like potential backup mating options who you friend zone, but keep them enough and give them enough attention so that they don't totally think they don't have a chance, because then they won't give you attention.
Right. Can I? How vulgar can I be on this podcast?
You can be vulgar. We're talking about sex research after all.
Okay. I'm just going to quote the great sex researcher Chris Rock, who did a whole routine on this, and he says, you keep those platonic friends because they're like a dick in a glass case. That is the way he put it. It's an emergency penis that you might want to access. Yeah, I think that's absolutely one of our strategies, and I think males do similar things as well. Because all of these things are opportunities to see. I mean, one of the things I think that men have a real problem with. Is they don't understand women, but I mean, precisely they don't understand women because we know if we find a woman attractive. I mean, we know really, really quite quickly if we find a woman attractive. Women, it's much, much more complicated. And it's partly because what they're carrying is just way more valuable. So obviously they have to be picky. But I think one of the other things that men really find it hard to grasp is how much female desire is driven by other females. We don't get that. Okay, there aren't male groupies. Males do not go to female rock stars and be sort of checking out. Do all the rest of you find her attractive? I better find her attractive. Okay, we know if we find her attractive, and we probably do. And the female rock stars complain. Why do we get any groupies? Why do we have the column of men outside our dressing rooms wanting to have sex with us? Well, you do. You don't want to have sex with those guys. Whereas with the groupies, they are to some extent queuing off one another. And that makes perfect sense. I mean, we've known about this. Ronald Fisher, the geneticist, described the sexy sons hypothesis way back in the 1930s. And this isn't just of our species. It pays females to cue off other females because whatever quality, and it really doesn't matter whether it's actually something that contributes to fitness or it's just an aesthetic quality. If it's heritable, it could just be a pretty feather, or a way of walking or an accent or anything. If it's a heritable quality and the local females find it attractive, then it pays you as a female to find it attractive because your offspring will carry that gene, or the gene for finding it attractive if you have a daughter. But if you've got a son, he'll have that feather, or more likely to have that feather, or way of talking. So yeah, I mean that's another thing. That I think men have a tough time realizing that you get these massive runaway effects, sort of when it seems grossly unfair. I don't have anybody, and his guy's got dozens of women. Yeah, no, it is unfair. Sorry.
So that makes sense to me for most sexually selected traits. And I don't actually know whether most of our hominin ancestors would have had something like clothing or not, particularly clothing covering your genitalia, but it's less obvious to me how the larger penises would be selected for if it's not a visible signal.
Oh, well, I mean, it is a visible signal in some cultures. There are certain Papua New Guinean cultures where the guys will go out and they'll have they might have their penises out, or they might have done something to them like infibulate them, or they might have these penis sheaths on them. We had cod pieces in the West up until the 16th or 17th century, but they could be sexually selected without. They could be sexually selected. I mean, in the act of sex. I mean, even in cultures where simulated erect penises are a fashionable thing, like cod pieces or penis sheaths. Men don't all go around with an erect penis all the time, so you'd only be selecting on its flaccid length, which is. I don't know what the correlation is between showers and growers. That's an interesting. It's the kind of thing I feel I ought to know the answer to, but I don't know. I'm sorry. But my guess would be that what's being selected for is the likelihood of producing orgasm during intercourse. And women report this. They don't typically report that length is a crucial factor. They do report the girth is though. That's important. And that would be stimulating crucial areas.
What about in cultures where you see the opposite? I've heard about Greeks and Romans. It was considered animalistic and like an undesirable quality.
Right. Yes. I mean, what you've got there is aloof cultures. Remember, I was saying that you've got intimate and aloof cultures. Now, I mean, I have to say I haven't studied this directly, but you interestingly, and but you've just given me something that I can go off and measure. Certainly the Greek. I don't know so much about the Roman one, but certainly the Greek culture was and things like Spartans would be highly like this, which is kind of interesting to the number of sort of online bros who think they're Spartans. I wonder how much they followed this through. But highly aloof male cultures tend to have an awful lot of top-down enforced homosexuality, and the Spartans were absolutely no exception to that. And is penis size particularly a desiderata when you get cultures like that? It's certainly not being selected for by the females. And I don't know is the interesting answer to that. I can think of a population I can go and ask. But aloof cultures, highly aloof cultures are ones where the men and women live in different parts of the village. They often talk different languages. They have different myth cycles. The men, sometimes the anthropologists call them female gardening ecologies, which is sort of anthropology speak for the women do all the real work and the men spend their time flying into magnificent rages at threats to their honor and making magnificent spears and other beautiful objects, stuff like that. And it might seem like that's very exotic, and it is. However, it's also, if you think about it, it's the British public school system, and it was, as well as being the Spartan military system. And it's well designed for creating males who don't particularly get on with females, while also at the same time desiring them. How that might manifest itself in genital sizes, I don't know, but you raise a really interesting question that I want to go away and have a think about.
Yeah, that seems like it would be something relatively easy to measure. And going back to the PhD research you mentioned, was this the type of thing where is it plethysmography? Something like you're actually measuring like blood flow on the
gloves. Yeah. Now, we don't really do much of that here at UCC. I used to have colleagues who I think I have a colleague who had a patent on one of the types of plasmograph. I'd have to check that. But yes, we used to do a lot of that research. I want to stress, I don't do that kind of, I haven't done that kind of direct research myself, but we used to do a lot of it here, and sort of direct blood flow, because, I mean, for example, we used to, people who are accused of being child molesters, one of the ways of either defending or accusing them would be checking their responses to certain kinds of stimuli, and that's how you do it. Although I want to stress that's not what I do. I deal with consenting adults.
So that yours was more based on survey measures of
The initial stuff was based on secondary data, which was medical, and then it was surveys. But then the follow-up stuff was direct. So we created a protocol. So what we think is happening is that the sperm retention with oxytocin as the mediating neurotransmitter, and exactly what the mechanism is at the business end. I mean, I think it's sperm insult caused by pressure changes in the uterus. There's an anatomist called Roy Levin who thinks that what happens is that there is a thing called cervical tenting, for reasons best known to Roy, and shout out to Roy, because he comes out of retirement every time I appear in order to say that I've misunderstood him. So please, Roy, come and tell everyone how I've misunderstood you again. I consider an awful lot of my research to be sort of highly dependent on his anatomical stuff, and then so when he comes on, goes, no, it's not that at all. I've tried to get to the bottom of it. Several of us have, but we can't. He thinks there's a thing called cervical tenting that goes on there. But the upshot of all of it is that somewhere up to an hour after intercourse, there's a thing called backflow, where material is ejected. And you can measure that, and we came up with a way of measuring it. So we put a kind of a sperm simulant into women, and do you know what a moon cup is?
No.
So some women use them for periods if they don't want to insert something because of things like toxic shock dangers, or because of environmental concerns. There is this sort of rubber device which you can insert, which just collects fluid, and we just thought, well, we can use that. We can collect the sperm simulant fluid. So you insert the sperm simulant. We got something that was something that they use in porn films as a kind of that looked like sperm, and it has the same viscosity and properties. We put the moon cup there, and then bring the woman to orgasm using a Hitachi magic wand, which does deep tissue stimulation. So it creates stimulation deep inside the genitalia. And then we just measure what comes out, and we've done this. We haven't done it with enough people to be sure, but we've got between 15 and 20% reduction in sperm backflow, and we think that's the thing that's creating the fertility difference. And interesting, when we published on this, we got approached by a fertility clinic over in the Czech Republic called Cube. And they said, well, that's interesting, because that's exactly what we think is happening. We haven't got formal data on it. However, what we have got is sort of informal data. And I looked at their informal data, it was actually pretty good. And because they had over 100 couples, and they were finding that the ones where the woman was orgasming regularly were having better fertility than ones where she wasn't. And we'd like to do a collaboration with them, and it got stymied by COVID and various other things, but I'm hoping to get back in touch with them, and maybe if we get a bit of grant money, we could actually do something on a bit of a larger scale. Yeah, that would be a sort of next research dream, I guess.
So that makes a lot of sense from this evolutionary perspective. If the orgasm itself has some role in sperm retention or letting it go deeper, but you said there's multiple types. So are there some types more associated with that than others?
Well, so initially with the surveys, oxytocin creates a bunch of effects. Okay, so if you give people oxytocin, you can, and I mean, there's a whole team, Wilt, the team over in Eastern Europe. They were injecting women with large doses of oxytocin and just actually watching sperm-like fluid go up the various tubes towards the dominant follicle. So we know that happens. We also know there's a thing called uterine peristalsis, which is the sort of squeezing action, which we think women can feel at least some of. We also know that there are psychological concomitants like apnea. Well, actually, it's a physiological one, isn't it? Apnea is the breath catching, where you actually feel you can't breathe for a bit. There's also a sense of loss of self, a sense of floating. There are other sensations too, akin to urination or actual female ejaculation. Some of which the last two we don't think are associated with oxytocin, or they might be. Anyway, the more oxytocin-like orgasms were associated with deep penetration and also certain kinds of partner characteristics, such as being considerate, being sexually dominant, all the rest of it. And we think those are the ones that are more, we haven't measured. I just want to stress, we haven't measured the oxytocin levels directly. What we've measured is people's descriptions of things that are plausible oxytocin correlates. So we think that those are the ones that are doing the work. However, we could be completely wrong. And if we are, it'll be fine. Because if all orgasms are increasing fertility, then that's great, because that means that the protocols will be much, much easier to create. My initial foray into it was just kind of, why is this such a difficult phenomenon to pin down? Well, when you talk to women, they go, well, our orgasms aren't all the same. So that was an entry into it. And it seems like a plausible route to say, well, maybe some of them are a signal either to the woman or the man, sort of, right, that's fine, I've had enough now, leave me alone. But they're not actually increasing their fertility, while some actually are increasing their fertility. However, I want to stress, we haven't demonstrated that. And I would suggest for couples who actually are infertile, any way of increasing the chance of orgasm for the woman has almost certainly got to be a good thing. I mean, for no other reason than just, she's not going to be sexually frustrated, and she's going to want to do more of it.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about the study paradigm you mentioned earlier, and this is another one of those places where I'm a little bit hesitant of how to word it in particular. But obviously they're consenting adults.
Yes.
But what exactly are they consenting to? Because I'm imagining one extreme, the most private, might be, you give them a room, you tell them themselves how to hook up to any type of measurement device. They masturbate however they would want to. And then the other extreme would be, and this would be like more scientifically controlled for, which might be what you want, although then it has more privacy concerns of like who's administering the Hitachi, for example.
Yes. We have a kit. I can send it to people if they want. And it's the privacy of their own home. We would encourage them to be there with a partner. But we noted whether they were there with a partner. I actually can't remember all the figures off the top of my head because it's actually a few years ago now. But some were with partners, some were not. But we did encourage the deep tissue massage element of it, because one of the things our initial research found was that surface orgasms do seem to have different phenomenology from the deep ones. And I want to stress, we're very, very much not calling some of them clitoral and some of them vaginal orgasms. There's a huge history to that. As I've already shown with the model of the clitoris, it's anatomically wrong anyway. All orgasms are clitoral. It's just some maybe don't involve the full extent of the clitoris in quite the same way, because it's a large internal organ, and it's also it's erectile tissue. I mean, I think quite a lot of the time women are orgasming without being fully aroused, and I think this gets missed because I mean, this can happen with men too. You can make men orgasm without being erect. I don't know if people are aware of this. You don't have to be erect to be aroused. There are nurses.
Do you mean ejaculate, or just a different type of bodily orgasm?
No, they can ejaculate. You just get men to ejaculate by pressing on the prostate. You can also actually get men to ejaculate even with flaccid penises by putting enough vibratory stimulation on a flaccid penis, and I suspect that something a little bit like that is happening with the surface orgasms. That you're getting a release of tension, which is great, but you're not necessarily getting the full range of things that are happening. Which is not to say you shouldn't do it, by the way. As David Barris said, let 1,000 orgasms bloom.
So that wouldn't be.
This is a response to Elizabeth Lloyd's book.
It would be a little bit different than the vestigial framing then, because you could say that there's just shared gonadal tissue that is pleasurable in both sexes, and then I actually don't know the anatomy enough, but would there be some equivalent in the male prostate to what would otherwise
Yeah,
turn
there is.
into the vagina and fetal
There is.
development.
There's the women have a thing called the Skene's gland. I mean, and once again, this is another thing which I found fascinating. Back when I first started studying this, it turned out that half the anatomy textbooks were mislabeling the clitoris. Now, I'm not sure whether I might be a little out of date now, so maybe they've come up to date in the last few years. But it used to be. I used to live next to the Waterstones, the medical Waterstones bookshop in next to UCL in London. And I literally went in there, one day and just sorted out the textbooks into ones that were mislabeled clitorises and ones that didn't. It was roughly half and half. That's fascinating. Secondly, there's a female analog to the prostate gland called the Skene's gland, and that's interesting too. And that seems to release a bunch of things like zinc and antigens, and it's what some people call the G spot. Now, people get this mixed up because men want a button that makes women sexually aroused, and they've had a number of them suggested over the time. And one of them is, all right, so you've got the glands of the clitoris, and someone can sort of find that in the dark, maybe with a couple of goes. But then they've heard that, well, there's this other one, the G spot. Some think, oh, well, that's the same thing, and it's not. The G spot is inside on the anterior vaginal wall. And if that's stimulated, that will release a female ejaculate. And this is an example of what I was talking about earlier. Or you're saying, are we living in a sexually liberal or not culture? It's illegal to show female ejaculation in porn because that's taken to be urination, and urination is a sort of fetish too far, certainly in the UK. And we've analysed it, and it's not urine. And once again, there are learned papers out there saying, well, it's got the same constituents, it's got the same, it's 90% water, and the water comes from the bladder. And go, yeah, all right, so what? Beer is 95% water. It doesn't mean that beer is urine. It's the other bits that matter. And the risk of being perhaps vulgar again, smell it, taste it. It's not the same stuff. It doesn't contain the same stuff. It's got fructose in it. It's got zinc in it. And some cultures celebrate it. I've seen pictures. Actually, no, I've seen the actual jars. There are 15th century Japanese bowls whose only function is to collect female ejaculate because of its health-giving properties. Yeah, and similar. I mean, there are similar cultural variations where some people celebrate this and some don't. And ours is a culture which kind of sort of doesn't. And interestingly, and I suppose I keep on saying I'm not doing sex therapy, but I think people could perhaps be a little bit more thoughtful before they throw out things like, for example, Ben Shapiro a few years back. You remember what was Megan Thee Stallion? I'm sorry, I apologize, I'm an old man. Megan Thee Stallion. She did a song called WAP, which was a rap song, which was all about things like vaginal lubrication and also ejaculation. And Ben Shapiro didn't exactly cover himself with glory by saying, this would be a medical condition. It's not, not only is it not something that's wrong with somebody, women don't need any more feelings of inhibition. They don't need to be told that they're wetting the bed or something when they're ejaculating. Tension, inhibition, stress, these are not good things for sex. And I suspect, if nothing else, those are some of the things that contribute towards infertility. Feelings, cortisol levels, tension, all that kind of stuff. It's striking that a lot of times when couples take fertility treatments, quite often when they've had when it becomes successful, quite often they don't need one the next time, as if somehow the pressure's off, as if somehow all the mechanisms are working again. And a lot of sex researchers wonder whether how much of this is down to stress. And how much there's an influence of stress on orgasming, because that certainly doesn't help people. But anyway, sorry, I'm maybe drifting off the point slightly.
Well, that seems like it's related to the sympathetic versus parasympathetic brain activation.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yes. My friend and colleague Adam Saffron, and as well as Diane Fleischman, have done work on this idea of getting in sync with partners. And they've actually I think Adam's measured brainwave coordination. I don't know if he's measured it actually during sex. I'd have to go back and check. Don't quote me. But it certainly seems entirely plausible. There's a huge amount of things that humans do that are in concert with one another, and that kind of runs into a lot of the stuff we do in the lab. Because we sing, we dance, we play in concert. If you slow down a mother and baby. If you slow down the video of a mother and baby, they look like they're dancing with each other. They're so in sync. Their gaze is just locked onto each other. And there's a huge amount of things that we do like that. And yeah, if sex wasn't like that, put it another way, if sex couldn't be like that, it would be kind of puzzling, given that we've gone some effort to mate face to face. Most animals don't. We do. Bonobos do. Some cetaceans do, but we actually look into each other's eyes, at least some of the time when we're doing it. And it would be puzzling if there wasn't some purpose to that. Yes.
Have there been these types of female orgasm studies in animals as well, in other primates?
The advantage I have over my colleagues is I can ask my experimental participants, how it feels, which that's nice. But we've measured oxytocin, measured peristalsis, uterine peristalsis in a lot of other species. And this is one of the things that interested me when I first got into the field, is that the oxytocin bit and what it does in terms of sperm retention is not only well known, it's been known about for nearly 50 years. In fact, there's some of the animal models go nearly 100 years. And that was really startling to me. And I still do occasionally get invited to referee or peer review papers in animal fertility journals, because I quote a lot of the animal fertility stuff, and so presumably my name falls out as a sort of as a possible expert. So I get asked to pronounce on the viability of pig sperm retention systems, and I sort of have to politely go, so I don't think I'm your guy here. But yeah, I mean, they're not squeamish about this. In the farming industry, sperm is valuable. It's extremely valuable. So you don't want it spilling out all over the floor. So you make sure that the females that you're trying to inseminate retain as much of it as possible. How do you do that? You stimulate oxytocin is how you do that. Now, I don't know how that feels to the horses. I don't know how it feels to the pigs. I hope it feels nice for them. But the farming community can't afford to be squeamish about oxytocin mechanisms.
Mhm.
Now, the difference with humans is, we can ask you, how oxytocin-y was that? We can say, how floaty do you feel? Was there any apnea? Do you feel any internal pulsing sensations? We can't ask other animals those things, but we can measure oxytocin. So I suppose one of the reasons why it's such an interesting field is you can't do the kind of smoking gun study that you can do in other areas. So you kind of have to sneak up on it, using multiple methods. And so, survey is part of it, but lab methods where they're appropriate. But sometimes they are, because I think that unless you find labs particularly erotic, the full range of human behavior just isn't available there.
What about female ejaculation? Is that a uniquely human adaptation?
Be very surprised if it was. I don't know. It's the honest answer. We know that Skene's glands exist in other animals. They certainly exist in rats. I don't know about other animals. It's a while since I read about it. They certainly exist in other animals. It would be very odd if there wasn't a similar kind of thing. We don't know what it does. It kind of, analyzing it, it looks plausible that it makes the vaginal tract less hostile to sperm, because it's got food in it, for example. It lowers pH values. We know that with those things we know. So it certainly looks like a plausible route to explore, but that we haven't directly linked it to fertility.
But what else are you currently exploring, Rob, or future research plans?
To do with orgasm, what I'd really like to do is do the fertility stuff. I mean, if our guess is right, this shouldn't be too hard to study. We need reasonably large populations. We create a protocol that maximizes the chance of orgasm with some of those populations, and have a control group, and then come back in 9 months and count the babies. There should be two different sizing. I put in an ERC proposal for this last year. Got reasonably away with it. Then got told by one of the reviewers that all of this was impossible, and Elizabeth Lloyd had proved that it was impossible, which kind of made me go grrr. Please read my book and read some other stuff as well. But I'm hoping to have better luck next time. You can't expect your reviewers to know everything.
Yeah.
The other work we're doing at the moment is looking at other human behavior through an evolutionary lens. So I've got a PhD student at the moment looking at spree killers, and we've been looking at that research. We're looking at those data for a few years, looking at different types of spree killers and what predicts their behavior.
What is that?
So these are quite often they're probably the most common type to make it into the media would be the school shooters.
Mm-hmm.
Like people who go in and shoot up schools and kill children. But there's also an older type of spree killer that tends to kill family members, but also work colleagues. And we looked at that through an ecological lens a few years back, and once again got massive pushback. And then suddenly, quite often this happens, there's sort of a dam burst. And I'm not suggesting I'm responsible for the dam bursting. I think what happens is that ideas sort of have their time, and if you stick to your guns, what you'll find is people will sort of go, "Oh yeah, no, we knew that all along. Oh yeah, no, we all knew that." Kind of go, and you kind of go, you're looking back and go, "You bloody liars! I've got the receipts. I remember what you were saying a few years back." But people seem to be coming on board with the idea that there are different types, and a good way of making sense of the types is that the young spree killers are ones who are trying to acquire status and are envious of what sexual access others have, and the older ones are coercive, controlling types who are jealous of losing their partners and or jobs and status. And what you've got is a sort of an overspill of that behavior, and that they have very different psychological profiles. So that's the stuff we're working on now.
Right. Sex and violence seem like very research disciplines, but when you think of it through this evolutionary lens and through status, it makes sense how they converge.
Sure. And because, as Sarah was, because I was an outsider, this is only my 13th year at UCC, and I was a school teacher for 20 years. And as a result of that, it means that I don't have the kind of, and I don't want to say political in a sort of party political sense, I don't have the kind of allegiances that people have by having come up the usual route. So I can please myself. I can study what I like, and the sort of the quiet words that people would have with people go, "Oh, I wouldn't study that," or "You shouldn't be," I've never had any of those. Now that means that I occasionally do upset people. On the other hand, it means I get to study what I like. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your sharing, Rob. Thanks for your wisdom.
My pleasure.
It's a great conversation.
Thanks very much.